Star Trek Nemesis ending and why it killed TNG movies explained. When Star Trek Nemesis premiered in 2002, it was supposed to be the triumphant send-off for the Next Generation crew, a cinematic conclusion that would honor their journey and perhaps set up new adventures. Instead, it became a franchise low point, both critically and commercially, effectively shutting the door on more TNG films for nearly 2 decades. What went wrong wasn't just a single misstep. It was a mix of narrative choices, tonal dissonance, and behind-the-scenes mismanagement. The ending of Nemesis in particular encapsulates why this was the swan song for Captain Picard and his crew on the big screen. The setup, a new generation villain for a final voyage. Every Star Trek film aims to do two things: raise the stakes beyond what television could, and capture the essence of what makes the crew compelling. The Wrath of Khan had its operatic tale of vengeance and sacrifice. First Contact gave the TNG cast a perfect nemesis in the Borg, balancing action with character arcs. For Nemesis, the writers decided that Picard himself would be the thematic villain. The reveal of Shinzon, played by a young Tom Hardy, a clone of Picard raised in the Romulan Empire, seemed like a smart hook. A personal adversary with the same DNA as the captain? On paper, it promised introspection and drama. But while Shinzon's concept was intriguing, his execution faltered. Instead of being a nuanced mirror for Picard's fears and regrets, he was written as a brooding tyrant who leaned heavily on tropes of megalomania. That lack of depth made him feel less like a final boss for Picard and more like a pale imitation of Khan. By the time the Enterprise and Shinzon's massive warship, the Scimitar, faced off, the emotional weight simply wasn't there. The climactic ending, Data's sacrifice. The most infamous element of Nemesis is its ending. In a final act of selflessness, Data sacrifices himself to destroy the Scimitar's Thalaran weapon before it can annihilate the Enterprise. The sequence clearly wanted to echo Spock's death in The Wrath of Khan. A beloved character makes the ultimate sacrifice, and the crew is left devastated yet inspired. The problem? The setup and payoff weren't earned. Unlike Spock's death, which carried the weight of years of character development, camaraderie, and a truly no-win scenario, Data's sacrifice felt forced and strangely avoidable. The Enterprise had other options, and the writers conveniently ignored the fact that the ship is usually teeming with solutions that don't require permanent death. Fans were left frustrated, not heartbroken. Worse, the film undermined its own tragedy almost immediately. Before the credits rolled, the crew meets B4, a less advanced android prototype who begins displaying fragments of Data's memory. It played like the writers wanted to have their cake and eat it too, kill Data for the emotional punch, but also leave a backdoor for a resurrection. Instead of letting fans sit with the gravity of Data's loss, the film muddied the message. Spock's sacrifice gave fans a cathartic grief. Data's sacrifice gave them narrative confusion. Why the ending didn't work? 1. Copying without context. By mirroring Wrath of Khan so directly, Nemesis set itself up for failure. Spock's sacrifice worked because the franchise had built up to it over decades. Data's felt like a stunt, less a natural evolution of his arc, and more an attempt to mimic an older success. 2. Picard's story didn't resolve. The entire film was about Picard confronting his own mortality and legacy through Shinzon. Yet by the end, it wasn't Picard who had to make the ultimate choice, it was Data. The captain's journey remained incomplete, leaving audiences unsatisfied. 3. The B4 problem. B4 cheapened Data's sacrifice. Fans couldn't even properly mourn because the film immediately dangled the possibility of a loophole. It was an unforced error that made the ending feel hollow. Beyond the ending, why Nemesis killed the TNG films. While the ending highlighted Nemesis's problems, the reasons it killed the TNG movies run deeper. 1. Franchise fatigue. By 2002, Star Trek had been running nearly non-stop for 15 years. The Next Generation had its 7-season run, Deep Space Nine had just ended, Voyager had concluded a year earlier, and Enterprise was already struggling. Audiences were oversaturated. A final TNG movie needed to feel like a celebration. Instead, Nemesis felt like a darker, joyless detour. 2. Tonal misalignment. The best TNG episodes balanced high-minded philosophy with optimism and teamwork. Nemesis leaned heavily into action, political intrigue, and a bleak outlook. The Enterprise crew barely interacted in the way fans love. They weren't solving moral dilemmas together. They were just pawns in a war story. Without that ensemble charm, the movie felt like it was trying to be Star Wars or Battlestar Galactica, not Star Trek. 3. Neglect of the ensemble. Perhaps the greatest sin of Nemesis was sidelining nearly the entire crew. Riker and Troy finally got married, yes, but beyond that, their presence was minimal. Geordi, Worf, Crusher all had little to do. The film revolved around Picard, Data, and Shinzen, forgetting that TNG worked best when every character had a role in solving the problem. First Contact understood this. Nemesis did not. 4. Poor marketing and release timing. Paramount released Nemesis in December 2002, just 5 days before The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers and Harry Potter, and The Chamber of Secrets. The competition was brutal. Worse, the studio barely promoted the film, as executives had already begun losing confidence in the brand. The box office reflected this, with Nemesis earning a paltry $67 million worldwide on a $60 million budget. The legacy of Nemesis's failure. The fallout was immediate. Paramount shelved any further TNG film projects. Plans for a potential follow-up where Data's consciousness would fully merge with B4 never materialized. Instead, the franchise turned inward, focusing on television experiments. Enterprise limped along for 2 more years before cancellation and eventually going dormant until J.J. Abrams' 2009 reboot. For the cast, Nemesis was a bittersweet farewell. Patrick Stewart admitted he was disappointed with how little resonance the film had with audiences. Brent Spiner, who had lobbied for Data's death believing the character had run its course, later admitted he regretted how it was handled. Fans, meanwhile, were left feeling like their beloved crew hadn't gotten the proper send-off they deserved. Why Star Trek? Picard was the real goodbye. It wasn't until nearly 2 decades later that Star Trek, Picard gave audiences closure. Season 1 of the series dealt directly with Data's death, offering Picard and viewers a heartfelt farewell scene that Nemesis never delivered. By Season 3, when the TNG crew reunited, fans finally received the cinematic finale they'd wanted in 2002, a chance to see the crew older, wiser, but still together, saving the galaxy one last time. That retroactive healing proves just how much Nemesis botched its ending. The fact that it took an entirely new series to undo the damage shows how hollow the film's resolution had been. Conclusion. A lesson in endings. The ending of Star Trek. Nemesis killed the TNG movies not because endings can't be tragic, but because endings must be honest. Data's sacrifice wasn't earned, Picard's arc was incomplete, and the ensemble spirit of TNG was ignored. Combined with franchise fatigue and poor timing, the film landed with a thud instead of a triumphant finale. But there's an irony to Nemesis's failure. By closing the door so definitively, it forced the franchise to reinvent itself, paving the way for the 2009 reboot and eventually the streaming revival that gave fans Picard. In a way, the ending of Nemesis